This is the Team Sidelined podcast, a podcast launched to support the mental game of student athletes during these extraordinary times of COVID-19's impact on life and sport. Brought to you by Sidelined USA. We invite athletes, performance coaches, and resource experts to discuss coping skills, strategies, and mindset work, which have proven to help sidelined athletes face their adversity, build resilience, and forge forward even stronger. And now, here's our host, Executive Director of Sidelined USA, Christine Pinalto.
We acknowledge there's a lot of ups and downs right now due to COVID's continuous disruption on sport. The impact of the shutdowns, the varying degrees of return to play clearances, the impact on championships, the threats of additional shutdowns, this is all taking a mental toll on athletes. It's fair to say it's going to be a challenging year. And the mental game is more important than ever. And that's where the Sideline USA team wants to step up to help. We get it. We understand these challenges perhaps like no other group. We're a nonprofit that serves athletes who've experienced a medical exit from sport, such as career-ending injury, health diagnosis, repeat concussions. And we help them address the mental and emotional impact of being cut off from their sport, being blocked off from their goals. So whether your personal losses are permanent or more temporary, we'll use our expertise to address the hard topics and build you up with practical insights from people who really understand the factors at play in the mental game when you're forced to the sidelines. We hope you'll follow along with us this year and use this program as an opportunity to really address head-on the challenges you face. Our team is excited to get the conversation started with this first episode.
And now, Game 1, Coping with Loss, Loneliness, and Chronic Stress, featuring mental performance coach Matt Brown and athlete after-huddle with Matthew Harris and Alissa Boyhtari. Neither Sideline USA nor its affiliates provide clinical or medical care of any kind via their relationship with Sidelined. At no time should a user have an expectation of clinical care or professional services offered or rendered.
Hi, everyone. Today I have with me Matt Brown. Matt is a mental trainer for Edge School for Athletes and mental performance coach for the Calgary Flames. He actually also is a former medically disqualified athlete. He had this experience in college where he was playing college football, and he had a severe neck injury that took him out of football altogether. So he understands these topics and issues from multiple perspectives. He understands these topics like nobody else, and we really, really appreciate him being willing to be a part of this project this year and share with us. You guys will see a lot of Matt this year. Matt, thanks for joining us and being a part of this.
Thanks for having me, Christine. It's always good to see you.
Thank you. All right, Matt. So we're going, I guess, technically, I think we're going on month 7 of pandemic, coping with the pandemic. It's much longer than all of us hoped. I mean, and we know that it's not going away anytime soon. There's no magic wand that's going to just magically take this away and everything's going to go back to life as we know it. In the beginning of this pandemic, there was a lot of talk about dealing with all the stressors that are happening for athletes. Everyone had to go home from college. Everyone had to stop all their sports. Now, of course, fall sports has been impacted as well. There's a lot of up and down going on. There's a lot of comparisons. There's certain programs that are playing, certain ones that are not. It's all over the board. What are you seeing as kind of the psychological aftermath of that this many months in, and realizing that this is continuing to take a toll on mental health and just general wellness at all in student athletes? What are your observations?
Well, one of the biggest obstacles is just the not knowing. If you knew, by the time we get to this point, it'll be done, it'll be over, we'll be back to normal, you'll be training and playing the rest of it, then you could have a very natural kind of grieving process, and then a rev up, and then you train, and then it's, everyone I think could deal with it a lot easier than being told, well, we might start in 2 months or 4 months or 6 months or 12 months. And because it just leaves you in that limbo where you just don't know, how to train or what to do, or it just I think that's one of the things that's most difficult right now, is just the not knowing. So, but it's been a busy, as we talked about a little bit, it's been a busy 7 months or so, because I think that athletes in a lot of cases are being hit by this harder than the general public. The general public, if you're kind of isolating and wearing a mask, and there can be a lot of more or less back to normal, but as athletes, so much of what makes you or that gets you out of bed in the morning has been taken away. And it's not just taken away once, like every day is its own loss. And so just, dealing with that emotional piece and kind of grieving what's been taken away is a really important part of the process.
Yeah, for sure. There's all of this, there's loss, and then there's chronic loss. And it makes a lot of sense what you said about like every day has its own loss, and it can get this, like, I don't know if this is the right term, but I feel like there's this compounding effect of loss upon loss upon loss. And that can obviously lead to, just a lot of lack of motivation, depression, just feeling this sense of like waiting for it to be over. But because it's not going to be over, there's no like end game, like you said, feeling like apathy, just like, why bother? What's the point if this whole year is a loss anyways? So what would you say to athletes who are feeling that sense of like, I don't know, the next step of loss, like turning into apathy because it just feels like it's too much to take on?
Right. Yeah. Well, I think the first piece is to understand, kind of what happens to us when we grieve, because chronically it's hard on athletes because it's so confusing. Because the first thing that happens is your energy goes away, and then your brain can only focus on what has been lost, what's been taken away from you. So it's by design. It's so that we can digest that change. But when you're an athlete and every day your energy is lower than what you're accustomed to, you can start to, not just, feel low, but feel badly about yourself, because you're like, usually I'm so motivated, I'm so energized, I'm so like, I pop out of bed because I can't wait to get after it. And so you haven't lost that. You're just in a grieving process, and so it's important to recognize that what makes you you and what makes you special, it's all still in there. But you're just dealing every day with this kind of aspect of your life being taken away. So the next part was, and through this and dealing with athletes here in Canada, there was that first part where they just felt sad a lot of the time, low energy, low motivation, tearful, always kind of right on that edge of emotionality. And then about 6 weeks into that process, you started to hear, like you say, something different. So it wasn't, I feel sad all the time. It's like, I'm not feeling anything. And what happens is if you're kind of chronically in that emotional state, eventually your system just fatigues, and just starts to kind of, you fall into sort of shutdown mode. And that's that kind of, I don't care, I'm not feeling anything anymore, feeling, which is it's a hard one to kind of unstick. But when you get that point, I think the next step that's most important is to say, okay, well, what has been taken away? Like it's not just the activity I love to do, it's the people that I do it with. It's that natural kind of rev up to game day or to the playoffs, or all those things that makes the season have a rhythm and a cycle to it. And that's been taken away as well. It's the relationship that you have with your body kind of starts to fall apart a little bit, because you're not training as much or moving the same way or getting to experience how good you are at that at that one thing. So once you identify kind of what are all those layers that have been taken away, then you can start to rebuild it in terms of, how can I connect with teammates? How can I get workouts in that still make me feel great and allow me to move and feel athletic and strong, and give me a sense of freedom? How can I take this time and give it meaning? And that's where it can be really useful to think of it the same way you would like a 4 to 6 month injury, where it's possible that in 4 months, you'll be back on track, but it's just as possible that it's going to take 6. And for a lot of people, that if you're just killing time in that time, then it's excruciating. But if you say, okay, I have that much time, somewhere between there and there. How can I transform my body in a way that's going to make me like a next level of myself when we do go back, to playing? So someone who, has an ACL reconstruction and they have that time, lots of times they'll say, okay, I'm really going to develop my core strength, or I'm going to be doing lots of Pilates and yoga and things that allow me to gain flexibility and mobility, or I'm going to work on my upper body strength and make that next level, better than it's ever been before. Because when you have a project like that and you have the opportunity to essentially transform yourself rather than just waiting and killing time and to jump back in the way you were before, then that time has purpose, and you can actually find motivation that you wouldn't be able to find otherwise if you were just rehabbing and getting ready to go.
Right. That's really good. I think a lot of athletes, it's helpful to think of it in terms of like those, like you said, like listing out the things that you've lost, or partially lost even, and then working to rebuild what is possible. Like there's certain limitations there, of course, but like where can we find movement? If we're finding movement of some sort in that space, even if it's not anything compared to what it used to be, it's like, I think we have to have a different marker, a different starting point from like where we're measuring our satisfaction with whatever outcome we're looking for. Because if we're measuring off of how it used to be, and this is something we talk about with medically disqualified athletes, it's like if we talk about like what used to be in terms of what we can't just like make happen magically, it's almost like we're setting ourselves up for frustration because we can never achieve that. That's out of our hands. So any thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. And, people think I'm joking when I say like pretty good's the new great, because if you are right, like if you are dealing with a situation where every day part of what you're dealing with is loss, so there's going to be an element of sadness and or frustration to each day, then right from the get-go, the amount of energy you have to work with is lower. So and then if you have an athlete who's starting the day with less energy, and then they have a workout that they don't feel good about, and they're chronically comparing that workout to what they usually do, then that what little energy you started with is going to deplete even more, day after day after day, to the point where you just feel stuck and you can't even motivate yourself to do a mediocre workout. But if you say, okay, I am running against the wind here every day, and so with that in mind, I'm actually, and this is hard for athletes to hear, but I'm actually going to lower the bar a little bit in terms of what I expect from myself. Because if I can kind of finish, a scaled down workout it's not what I'd normally do, but it's what I had to give on the day, then I get that endorphin and norepinephrine kind of high from the exercise. I feel good. I feel a little bit stronger. I feel like it was a success because I set the bar a little lower. Then now I have an opportunity to kind of build on that day the next day. But if every day you're comparing what you did to what you normally do, then you create this bleed of energy and happiness, and eventually again you get stuck. So it might be the only time athletes will hear me say this, but in terms of what you expect from yourself right now while you're going through this period, lower the bar a bit. Mm-hmm. Take more pride and satisfaction in, I started today not feeling very motivated, but but that was pretty good. And again, pretty good's the new great.
Pretty good is the new great. Let's write that on our mirrors, because
honestly, it shifts the paradigm to a place where what energy you have to give, you can grow fruit on that tree. You can get something out of it that becomes sustainable in terms of your energy and mood and motivation.
Right. So do you feel like, since athletes, they do tend to have a lot more loss right now, do you feel like coupled with that, like, it's my suspicion that just the personality of a dedicated athlete also is another challenge that doesn't necessarily work in their favor until they make it work. So have you seen any like tendencies that athletes might have just because of, you know, who athletes are, that maybe would lend them towards unhealthy coping?
For sure. Well, when you look at the fact that, you know, a lot of athletes, they're as good as they are because every day they see where they are and they know where they could be. And then the difference between those two things, it torments them. It's uncomfortable. And so it compels them to work. And I mean, that's more often than not, that's kind of the profile of an athlete. So to begin with, they're probably dealing with a bit more kind of anxiety and worry and fear than the average person. So if on top of that, in the past, they were able to minimize some of that angst by just training really hard and having little successes, and then you take the ability for them to do that away, then you can see them kind of hitting that threshold of, I don't feel like I can handle this, more quickly than the average person. So, you know, because it was a Polish fellow in the 30s named Dabrowski who first kind of pointed out that the more higher functioning people are often the ones who they're that way because they are bothered by the difference between where they are and where they could be. So it's so like I said, I just think this time is hitting the high achiever way harder than it is Joe Schmo, because there are a lot of kids that are like, this is awesome, I'm playing so many video games. You know? And it's, you know, and I don't have to go out and kind of contribute to the world, but the athlete, this is just, it's been such torment. But that's where being purposeful about how you design your day and what constitutes a good day and a good workout and a good training session, tweaking those can diminish some of that pain.
Mm-hmm. For sure. So along with coping with loss, there is another element that's extremely challenging, and that is that isolation that the pandemic has caused and continues to cause, even for teams that are working out. You know, they have to do it in a way that just does not feel normal. Sometimes contact's allowed, but only a certain number of days a week. And, you know, it gets out, and then they can't they're not supposed to hang out with other non-teammates because that exposes them to additional, you know, potential for the virus, and then they could spread that to the team. And there's this stress of like, when we do get to return to play, if I'm the one that like gets COVID and then I'm passing it on to other people, there, you know, I've heard from athletes that's kind of terrifying. It feels like a lot of pressure to not get COVID. And because of that, and then coupled with just like the isolating tendencies, and like when you feel like, well, what can I do that's allowed, there just is this real sense that I'm seeing of just more disconnected than ever. And, you know, you get tired of Zoom meetings. We're hosting a Zoom meeting, so we're contributing there, but it's the best that we got. So I know there's no magic answer here that no one has ever thought of before, but is there any, like, just from an athlete care perspective, like, what would you say to an athlete who's maybe struggling with feeling like just this sense of loss from that social interaction that as it normally is?
I remember when it all started, I was doing Zoom meetings with kind of each of the Edge School sport groups, and I was talking to these kids, like they were like, you know, 10 to 13-year-old hockey players, you know, so lots of the time, you know, how they act is pretty, you know, pretty kind of puffed up, and you know, I'm not scared, or I'm not, you know, that doesn't hurt. And I said, like, what sorts of things are you guys feeling right now? And they, you know, it was a bigger group, so they would just kind of type in, you know, and then you could kind of see the feed coming up, and some were like, I'm frustrated, I'm angry. Someone said sad, and then someone said, I just thought for an 11-year-old to be this vulnerable in front of his peers, he typed, I'm so lonely. And then like right after that, you see same, yep, me too. Like just, it's like he just nailed it. I thought, wow, like that's, for him to say that in that forum tells you how intense it was. So then we started to talk about, obviously what you're used to, because the other thing with young athletes is they're always touching each other and, like arms around each other and wrestling and hugging, and because they're so, they're athletes, they're physical. They live in their bodies more than the average person does. And so not being able to even kind of touch and reach out or high five or like all that stuff, that in itself is its own loss to an athlete. So so that feeling of isolation can be profound. But I think the key is to say, okay, we know that we can't have ideal, but how can we do this in a way that doesn't put anyone at risk, in kind of, smaller groups that are outside or socially distanced. And, one of the things that, for kids that I knew that live close enough to each other, is like, you guys both have a dog. Meet at a dog park, stay 6 feet, apart, walk your dogs, and just walk and talk and be, just be in that same physical space with each other. And, just the dogs of the people I worked with were like over the moon because they're just getting walked constantly, because, that it's not the same, but it's really close. In terms of just being physically with someone, but you're not in physical contact, so you're not taking a great big risk with it, and you're outside, so that mitigates risk as well. But you get to socialize, you get to be with a teammate, you get to just walk and talk and be, and just finding those things that allow you to be together. The more organic, the better. So walking together and walking dogs is really good. Being outside, in someone's driveway with chairs that are all 6 feet apart is better than Zoom and FaceTime and Google Meets and all that stuff. And those electronic versions. Yeah, they're all
Snapchat.
And that's one of the conversations we had was like Snapchat. It augments your socializing well. Right? Because it's a little, because you have each other during the day where you're in the same physical space and you can read tone and body language, and you can actually see them and hear them talking. But Snapchat, it takes away so much of that sensory part. It takes away the animation of a face. It takes away the tone of voice. It takes away the excitement in what they're saying. And all you're left is, with this still and some text. So it's just not as good as, it's not as good as even talking on the telephone, which people are funny, right? Because they're like, phone is an app on my phone that I hate when people try and use it.
I know. I've got 2 teenage daughters and they're like, Mom, no one calls each other. And I'm like, well, this might be the time. Time to change that, because just like you said, just that there's only so much that typing can do, and I think we have to acknowledge that's your preferred method, but there has some serious weaknesses to that right now, and that may be part of why you feel so isolated, is because it's just that sense of like the personality behind the nonverbals even are just like maybe doing video calls is a way to make it feel a little bit more in person and less like I'm gonna ring my friend like in a really weird way.
The FaceTime is great because it's because you can see in real time someone responding to you and vice versa. Because what people tend to like about text and Snapchat and those things is you get to control it completely. And at the end of the day, when you're kind of tired and you just want to be, you want to kind of drive that ship yourself, that makes sense. But when you haven't had any social contact with anyone, then the closer you can get to the real thing, where you can see the animation and their body language and facial expression change in response to what you're saying and how you're saying it. That's unless you have a medium that captures that, of course you're going to feel lonely and isolated.
Definitely. Well, all of these things are really good. We're going to wrap up really soon here, but I'm just thinking about some of the things that you said have been really helpful when you think about dealing with chronic stress, which we haven't like named that word necessarily directly yet, but that's essentially what we're talking about when we talk about the loss, we talk about the isolation. Those are huge stressors. We talked about physical activity, talked about purposefulness, and finding ways to move the needle on some things in your life that you're feeling like you're missing, that are not as awesome as you want them to be. You talked about connecting with other people, even connecting with dogs, which I highly recommend. Finding a dog to love on, finding an animal to love on. If you're a cat person, that's okay, we forgive you. I'm a dog person, but like those kinds of things are all really helpful in dealing with chronic stress. I mean, we've definitely gone past the point of stress. We are dealing with chronic stress. And I think part of it for athletes is having that kind of self-compassion to say, yeah, like this is an extraordinary amount of stress that I'm under. And like any day that I, have that, good-ish day is a win. And how can I celebrate that? How can I move that, forward, do that over and over again? Is there anything that we missed? Like I know there's a million things that you could offer, but are there any like kind of tips or tools for managing stress that we haven't talked about yet?
Yeah. One thing is take sleep when you can get it, because, we didn't really talk about that, that full stress response, but we're built to respond to stressors where it's, there's a stressor, it energizes you to deal with it, and then the situation calms down, and then, on to the next stress or whatever it is. But this stress is not, it's not going away. So it leaves what we call our sympathetic nervous system kind of in a perpetual state of readiness, which means we never actually let down and fully rest. And they've been studying sleep quite a bit and during COVID, and saying most people are not sleeping as well or as long or as deeply as they normally do. And that's just, unfortunately, that's the new normal during COVID, because call a spade a spade. It's a global pandemic. People are dying, and the only way to contain it is through a lot of sacrifice for everyone. So that's stressful, no matter how you slice it. And so if you need to nap during the day, do. If you just finding sleep wherever it'll come allows you not to find yourself in a chronic kind of deficit of recovery. So that's one of the big things. I don't think you can be outside too much right now. That's another thing. That'll actually help with the sleep, because the daylight and then the dark allows us to kind of preserve and protect a cycle, in our bodies and how we rev up and then, and then calm down. There are all these threats to our well-being right now. So let's get back to basics. It's good nutrition. It's getting enough rest and sleep. It's being outside. It's moving our bodies. Like those are the things that are going to allow us to feel healthy and connected and sane. So
totally.
Yeah.
And just like you'd show up for practice, even when you don't feel like it, you kind of have to show up for yourself. You have to eat healthy. You have to push yourself to go outside when you're not made to. You have to lean into those things for yourself. And I think in terms of, you're your own teammate right now. It's team, fill in your name. It's you've got, we have to surround ourselves with community, of course, but at the end of the day, you're deciding, how much you're going to go forward with all of these kind of tips and movement, or if you're going to sit back and just let life happen and hope that this goes away fast. And I just, I like what you were saying, Matt, lots of really practical ideas about how to just continue to grow as a person during this time and not waste this year, even though I know it feels like a waste. I think it's a very natural feeling to feel like if you if you could, you'd just go hide under a rock until it was all over. I mean, I have felt that. But like, look, I think it's okay to do that for a day if you have to, right? Like if we have like a really hard, like, hey, today is a day I just don't feel like being productive. I think kind of building in some of those is a measure of self-care, but then turning it around and like, okay, time to get busy.
Yeah. And I think, athletes, because they're so inspired by their sport, they can get away with putting a lot of pressure on themselves, to squeeze as much out of their training as they can. So they can add pressure and it works out. But because of this kind of chronic deficit in energy that we have, it's, at least temporarily, it makes more sense to say, okay, my energy is just lower than what it'd normally be. What are some of the things that I can do that actually regenerate energy? So there's a difference between I have to work out and I have to train to get better versus if I work out and train, I'm going to feel better. It's going to give me some energy back. I'll feel better about my body and my life, my direction, my future. So it's, so what your workout does for you becomes more important than what you do for your workout.
That's good.
Put differently.
That's good. Yeah. We're going to do an athlete huddle right now. So next up is going to be a couple of mentor sideline athletes who have had a medical disqualification from sport, and they're now past that. It's been something that's part of their journey, but they've been able to kind of come full circle to acceptance, and they're going to reflect on the things that Matt has talked about and talk about their experiences with doing some of those strategies or not doing some of those strategies, and how that all worked out, and any insights that they have about the personal experience of living out these things. Matt, thanks so much for providing us with this foundation of tools. I know it's just the beginning. We're gonna continue to do more, but thanks so much for your insights.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It was fun.
All right, take care. All right, so today for our athlete huddle, I've got Alissa Boyhtari and Matthew Harris. Alissa is, both of them are former sideline athletes who had to give up their sport due to, actually in this case, it's both concussions. And now Alissa is a coach, and her sport is cross country. Matthew is a football player, and he now works at a venture capital firm and is a Sideline USA advisory board member. Thanks guys for being here to kind of do the after discussion on Matt's talk on loss, loneliness, and chronic stress. Alissa, we'll start with little brief introductions of your sideline story, and tell us like just the basics of how you became, medically disqualified, and just a little bit about that background.
Okay, well, hi, I'm Alissa. In high school, I played hockey, and I ran track, and I played a few different other sports as well. And as a junior, I actually got a really bad concussion that really the symptoms lasted for over a year, almost 2 years actually. And so I really had to make some hard decisions as a junior in high school, just as to, okay, do I want to risk doing this again, or do I want to heal and get better and focus on other things? And so I became sidelined then and just chose to give up hockey just as a safety thing. I actually was able to go on and run cross country and track in college, but I also kind of had a second sideline situation. I took a mental health leave from cross country and track as a senior in college, just because I think all of the anxiety from my first sidelined experience kind of followed me along, and that kind of became my identity for a long time. And so I kind of hit a peak of anxiety and just needed to take a break. So now as a coach, my goal is to make sure that kids don't feel alone in that and can have an open area to talk about it. So.
Awesome. Same question to you, Matthew.
Sure thing. Thank you for sharing, Alissa. A pleasure to be on this conversation with you, as well as you, Christine. My name is Matthew Harris. My sideline story revolves around concussions as well. My concussions date back to when I was in high school. I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship opportunity to go to Northwestern University, where I played football, started as a freshman, all Big Ten, and honestly just had aspirations to play in the NFL. And during during the year. I had concussions each year that I was there. And eventually it just got to a point where it got very easy for me to have a concussion. A normal football play would kind of put me out of the game for a couple weeks at a time. And eventually I just decided to stop playing the sport because of the long-term effects and not knowing what that would be like. And it was very difficult just knowing that, you know, I was a few weeks away from potentially getting drafted and going into the NFL and really accomplishing my dreams. But ultimately, I wanted, you know, my health and safety in the long run to be at the forefront of my mind. So I'm happy to be a part of Sideline USA, and it's a pleasure to really just partner with the work that's being done.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think what's neat is being able to have you guys here as, you know, people who've experienced from an athlete's perspective something as close as possible to what pandemic sideline athletes are feeling right now, as, you know, as particularly right now where so many of them are seeing other teams playing and being maybe jealous of that, of course, being jealous of that, I should say, and just feeling like there's a lot of confusion out there about return to play and when that's going to happen for them and if they're going to get shut down and all those things, a lot of that uncertainty. So I know you guys have really gone through the ringer when it came to having to get through, even though you in many ways decided for yourselves, your body's really decided for you, your brain health decided for you what was good for you and like what you could continue to do. So being sidelined like that, we really want to glean from your perspective. I know you guys have had a chance to listen through Matt's and my discussion about these issues, and like we're just going to kind of do an after huddle and talk about the things that Matt brought up related to your personal experience, asking you guys to like offer any additional insights as far as like your personal experiences with those particular themes. And we're going to let's start off talking about that energy drop. Matt started off speaking about a natural response to grief being an energy drop. Tell me, either one of you want to take this one, about like what that looked like for you and like how you made a change at some point towards rebuilding energy.
Well, something Matt said that really resonated with me is just that way when you're going through this like chronic grief or chronic stress, you are kind of in a perpetual state of readiness. You're always kind of up here and go, and you can't like let down, and that, you know, can affect your sleep, and that, you know, not getting sleep, you know, obviously affects your energy and so on and so forth. And so I kind of feel that because in both of my scenarios, I was so stressed out with the change, and all of a sudden going from playing to not, and having the schedule to not, and not being able to be with my teammates, and all these other different weird things that were kind of coming at me, and I couldn't quite put it in the box and just like handle it, I guess. And so that perpetual state of readiness really, like, you know, you can't sleep, and then you feel like you need to like work out to calm down, because sometimes just like getting in a run or a skate or whatever kind of helps you level off for the day if you had a stressful day. So not being able to do those things and then not sleeping, you're kind of just at this weird thing, and your energy really depletes, and then you're kind of confused. Does that make sense? And so I think that you know, as an athlete too, under chronic pressure and stress, that's helpful in a competition setting. But then when you get to a non-competition setting or like a real life scenario where you're not being competitive and you don't need that drive per se, it can kind of bite you in the butt a little bit. So.
And Matt mentioned system fatigue, and I think Alissa is talking about it a little bit too. And I think that energy drop really stems from that. You know, you're going, and then ultimately at some point it just stops and you have no control. And I think part of that lack and the fear of not having control feeds into the energy drop, because you're still trying to figure out how you navigate certain spaces. You may hit a roadblock. You're not getting sleep. In my experience, my energy drops happened all because, and it happened in a way of, you know, I played a role in that as well, because when I stopped playing, one of my pieces was I completely disconnected from my team. I felt like I just needed time to think. With that time to think, I also had to take the right precautions to actually take care of the concussion and the symptoms that I was dealing with, which evolve around not being around light, TV, music. So I was basically in a dark room, not being able to sleep, still trying to figure out how to navigate this space and also fearing the unknown. And then I just hit a wall. And then for me, my experience was just literally in a deep and dark place because of the concussion protocols, and I had to be. But that energy drop, I think it's something that if you really focus on the things that you can control, which are getting that sunlight, being around people or having conversations with people that really bring you joy, putting great things, whether it's music, reading, writing, whatever it may be, putting positive and good things in your mind and your body, meditating, if that's something that you practice, yoga, then those are some things that can combat some of those energy drops.
Right, for sure. And I heard a little bit about both of you were talking about like re-engaging with like some kind of purpose, some kind of forward movement. Matt talked about a couple of things there. He talked about purpose and like just not like wasting, making the most of this time. He talked about like kind of staying competitive. Like if competition is something that you've had to give up due to the pandemic, how can, just how the role of competitive, that competitive spirit can have in kind of digging you out from like the lower parts of energy and bringing you up a little bit. Speak to like that purpose and that competition side of things. Were you guys able to kind of regain energy in any way through like learning how to be competitive in a different way, or maybe it is a different context other than sports altogether, or finding some kind of purpose through that kind of aftermath and that difficult downtime?
Sure. Part of the reason why I feel like I stopped playing was because I felt like I had an idea of what my purpose is. And for all athletes that are out there, I highly recommend, outside of athletics, if there's something that you enjoy, whether that's reading, writing, something artistically, really diving deeply and allowing that to become a part of you as well. For me, that was giving back to my community and mentoring young people. So I found my purpose throughout that process, and then also found other ways to compete, whether that's going out for runs, riding the bike. Now I'm golfing, and that's such an internal and personal way to compete with yourself. That it's just, there are always opportunities out there. Sometimes you just have to be a little bit more creative because it isn't heads on, it isn't playing hockey, it isn't playing football. Maybe it's, just going to the park and running a lap and timing yourself and seeing if you can do better for that next one. But there are so many different ways and practices that I think it's a beautiful thing because you can get creative and find out what works for you.
I think too, I really didn't figure this out until it was kind of a hindsight 2020 situation. Whatever you believe, like I believe God gave me a purpose and God gave all of us a purpose, but you have a purpose other than being an athlete. Like, for example, I tell my kids that I coach a lot, like, you're not a runner, you're a person who runs, or you are not a student, you're a kid who's learning, so that rather than saying that that's your identity, like I am an athlete, it's like, well, yeah, you're a person that does athletics, but that's not like actually what you're known as, you have a purpose of a lot of things, like you're kind and all, you're driven and you persevere and all these other things about you that are way more important than the actual sport. And I think that's something that's important to hang on to, like, hi, this is a part of my life, but it's not my whole life, and I feel for, seniors in high school or seniors in college in particular who are getting shuffled around and all this stuff, you're like, oh my gosh, I wanted to go do this in college, or, oh my gosh, I wanted to do this after college or whatever, involving athletics. And I think that sometimes because that's your goal, it becomes your sole purpose and identity, but you're made for so much more than simply this one thing. There's so many things about you that are important. And I also think too, like, being able to tweak that and being able to, kind of still hold yourself accountable, if you still have competition coming up, or maybe there's a winter sport that you're hoping that will happen or whatever. I think that being able to, tweak tweak your view, I guess. And whether it's, Matt talked about like lowering the bar. So maybe refining your basic skills, you know, whether that's, you know, running form, or whether that's getting stronger in the weight room, or whether that's, you know, basic shooting skills for whatever sport you play. Different things like that, being able to tweak stuff like that and go back to the basics and start building your way up that way. Sometimes that's another good way to switch your focus if you're still playing. Just giving yourself permission to backtrack and build from the ground up again, I think is important.
Right.
Yeah, Alissa, you said something that really hit home to me, and it's not an easy process by any means. You have to show yourself grace and backtrack and really be easy with yourself, knowing that these are unprecedented times, whether you're a sideline athlete or you just have to sit out for a while and you see other people play. There's incredible opportunity for you to still get a competitive advantage, whether that's watching film, working on footwork, and a lot of things that Alissa mentioned. So again, it's really about just re-navigating. I think as athletes, we have that instinct and that ability to do that naturally. Sometimes it's hard to actually understand that. But if you think about, you know, if you're a hockey player or if you're a football player, one drive or one play, you may hit the puck wrong, or someone may catch the ball on you. You have to bounce back that next play and really get it going. So for me, I tried to, and it took a while, it's a process, but you have to kind of try to use some of the abilities that you may have learned while playing your sport and adapt that to your livelihood as well.
Yes, that's really big. That's one of our big messages with Sideline USA, is that it can feel like your whole world is upended. It can feel like you don't, and I think for a lot of pandemic sideline athletes, you might not recognize your current life. You know, if you're a college athlete who's not able to be in the dorms, or if you are able to be in the dorms, but because you're playing with your team or practicing, with your team, you're not allowed to hang out with anyone outside of the team because you have to stay, you know, reduce all the, you know, risk and things for catching COVID. I mean, there's just a lot, there's a lot going on right now, those pressures, and just being able to really understand that this competitive edge that you have as an athlete, because of who you are, the skills that you've built up in sports, really helps you cope. But it may not be immediately obvious. Like, you may need to like milk that a little bit and really think about yourself as more than an athlete, and how athletics have really built you up as a person. And one of the exercises that we'll talk about in another webinar down the road, but one exercise that's helpful is like even just making a list of like who you are as a person. Like, what has sports taught you? What are the skills? Like, what made you a great player? What makes you a great player? And like, those are the skills and those are the character qualities to really dig into now and develop and apply to other contexts. That mindset, the mental game right now is hard. And I think we've hit on a lot of points here. Give yourself grace, because the mental game is hard, but also dig into who you are because you're a competitor, to help get you to those next places, and understanding it's not a one and done fix. Like, you're not going to do that once and then be on the right path and like never look back, unless you're really lucky, maybe. But more realistically, that's going to be an up and down. You're going to get hit with like things that happen this year that kind of trigger you back into feeling, you know, let's face it, hopeless. Like, why am I working so hard on this workout if we don't even know if we have a season? And I can't imagine working all these hours every single week, making the sacrifices that I do, if we end up getting shut down. So I know motivation is a huge issue. We'll talk more about those things, but like for this purposes of this conversation, because I know we can't tackle all of the issues, let's finish out talking about a couple things. One, isolation, and how the role of like, just when we are trying to self-protect because we just feel numb, we just feel, you know, despair, we just feel defeated, how our human tendency is to retract rather than to lean in to social interaction, and how that's complicated by pandemic restrictions. And then let's talk about any coping strategies for handling stress. We've got about, let's say, about 5 more minutes here. So let's hit isolation first. This is obviously a huge one. Matt addressed it straight on, but would you guys have any personal reflections to share about maybe your own isolating tendencies when you were kind of, you know, feeling down and out?
This one kind of hits home for me in particular. In both my scenarios, I really felt misunderstood, which is a huge anxiety point for me in general. That's what I learned, I guess, through the process is when I feel like people don't understand where I'm at or I don't feel heard, that just like really triggers anxiety for me. But I've learned the power of vulnerability and just being real, raw, and honest. We're not called to be perfect, but we live in a world that, there's highlight reels and there's instant gratification on the internet and all these things that, kind of make us forget that everybody is human and we all have faults and we all have struggles. And so one, being able to, again, we'll talk about grace or giving yourself permission to, say, hey, this is hard for me, but then also being able to be vulnerable and like whether you find a teammate or you talk to your coach or a friend or a family member, somebody, one of us, I don't know, and just being able to be vulnerable and say, hey, this is a struggle point for me, or hey, this is what I'm going through right now and this is how it feels. I feel like the more you allow yourself to be vulnerable, the more you realize that other people will do it back, and also how many other people might feel the same way that you do. And so I think that as hard as it is to open up and, show your weakness, it's super important because it's something I kind of found out after the fact that I know would have been helpful during both times that I kind of backed off from sports. So yeah, I think that's super important.
And Matt, I think he used a great example with the kid who said, I'm feeling lonely. And then a bunch of other young people said the same thing. I think that vulnerability piece is key, and just being honest with yourself during this time, because oftentimes, especially, we're in the middle of a pandemic and the people that you're surrounded around probably are going through similar things, but just haven't voiced it or don't have the words to voice it. So if you do have the words and you are feeling a certain type of way, really just want to double click on what Alissa said. Surround yourself around your family, talk about it, friends, get creative about being in person, whether it's going to the park and having lunch and just being 6 feet away, laying down blankets, whatever that may look like for you. We are in the middle of a pandemic, but you also still have control in certain spaces. So take advantage of that control and make use of this time in ways that are productive for you.
Yeah,
that's really good.
I think too, kind of bouncing back off of that, like along with vulnerability, asking for help is okay. Matt mentioned in the first segment something about athletes have a drive because they're uncomfortable with the gap between like where they are and where they want to be. And right now, where you want to be, back to normal, but you can't really use that as your baseline. So being able to set different goals or being able to utilize this time in a healthy manner and kind of find a different way to train or a different way to utilize your time sometimes requires you asking for help because you're uncomfortable with the gap of, hi, I don't feel great right now and I'm struggling right now and I don't want to be there anymore. And that your competitive drive is still kicking in there. And that's a good thing. You want to be better and you want to feel better and you want to utilize this time well. But sometimes it requires you, giving yourself grace and giving yourself permission to ask for help also. So
that's really great. I appreciate that so much. I would end there, but I didn't get to the chronic stress yet. I thought that was a really good thing to end on. But in case there's anything more, any tips you guys have on just like self-care when it comes to handling stress? Is there anything that you recommend that Matt either suggested or beyond what Matt suggested?
Sure. I think one is just understanding that's a process and it's ever evolving. Something you may do something today that worked really well and you're like, wow, I feel better, and tomorrow it may not work as well. But understanding again, it's a process. Self-care, it should be a priority. We're living in a time where sometimes we may need to take a break from social media. Sometimes we may just need to go outside and walk and leave our phone. Sometimes we may just need, to set up 10 minutes just to go on YouTube and put on our favorite comedian and just laugh or cry. Like those are things that are okay. And I think giving yourself the space and the time to do that is a part of that self-care piece that, everyone going through this pandemic is really coming face to face with. So just be intentional as possible about what that may look like for you, and also understand that you have to be adaptive. Like it may not work tomorrow, whether that's meditation, prayer, whatever it may be, talking to someone. It may not be as just a leaving of the stress as it may have been in the past, but I think that's a part of, similar to a game. Like you have to go in with a different game plan the next game, that next week. So if we approach it that way, I think just from a mental health mindset perspective, and just understanding that it's a process, I think that allows for opportunity to just not always have to have everything to be okay. You can acknowledge your feelings and the emotions and also what you need in that space.
Absolutely. I love that. And I also think too, you kind of touched on it, but celebrating your little victories, whether, something worked today and maybe it doesn't work tomorrow, but yesterday it worked and like it gave you a little bit of joy or like a little bit of, excitement, I guess, for your day, and continuing to grow, in and out of, an athletic setting, whatever that means, whether you try something new or, maybe you decide that you're going to have a chat with someone and be more vulnerable or whatever. That's growth, like different things like that, and celebrating those little wins, I think, are important. And I think too, focusing on finding things you like to do and what those do for you, now what you do for it. I know that Matt talked about like focus on what the workout does for you and how it makes you feel, whether it just like got your heart rate up and some of those endorphins going, or, you just like you moved like great, rather than like what you did for the workout, because you can't use like normal from before as your baseline now, and just giving yourself permission to let go of that and focus on now and like positive things and little victories. And I think the social media thing is huge, myself included. I need to remember that all the time, being able to unplug and just not continue to scroll and compare, because whether or not you're trying to compare, I think we all compare when we're looking at all these cool pictures and videos and all these things of people, having fun and doing all these cool things and comparing each other and whatever. And I think it's important to just pause from that and take a break, whether that's one day a week or whether that's for a week at a time or whatever. I think that that's a good thing to do also.
That's great. Matthew and Alissa, this has been fantastic. Thanks so much for your insights. Those are some really practical applications to the insights that Matt gave. Just to give everyone a heads up on the next topic, we're going to be diving in deeper to that kind of the play of thoughts in our heads, managing negative and self-defeating thoughts, because along the way, those are going to pop up like left and right, uninvited. These thoughts and distractions and discouragements are gonna just be something that we're going to be contending with for the foreseeable future as life doesn't look how we really would like it to look. Like, let's be honest about it. And let's talk about some tools that we can use to train our minds. Like, what do you do in that time? So that's the next topic. But for today, we'd encourage everyone to take these topics and start discussing them with your teams. Like, if this is only so good as you guys get talking, our listeners get talking with each other, supporting one another, acknowledging the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is like, this stinks and it's hard and no one wants to be labeled a whiner, but at the same time, this isn't like that. Like, this is just talking about real life and helping each other as teammates get through the mental stuff and be prepared, yes, for the physical when that comes to be for competition. But in the meantime, let's grow together as humans. Let's have each other's backs. Let's get stronger together. And that's just the message that we're trying to put out. Thanks again, Matthew and Alissa. Great talk.